The first snow of December arrived without warning. By the time Ethan Vale noticed it drifting past the windows of his apartment in Prague, the entire street below had already turned white. The old city blurred beneath the storm like a fading memory, its narrow cobblestone roads swallowed beneath frost and silence. Somewhere far below, tram bells echoed faintly through the evening fog, hollow and distant enough to sound almost mournful. Ethan sat alone beside the radiator, with a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The apartment smelled of dust-old books and the chemicals from undeveloped photographs hanging across the kitchen line. For weeks, he had barely left the place except to buy cigarettes and black coffee. Since his father's funeral in October, time itself had begun to feel soft around the edges, shapeless and cold. His father had died quietly. No dramatic final words. No revelations. Just a weak heartbeat fading into hospital static while snow gathered outside the windows of St. Anne's Medical Center. But grief was strange. It did not always arrive like a scream. Sometimes it arrived like silence. Sometimes it arrived 2 months later in the form of a letter slid beneath your apartment door. Ethan noticed the envelope around midnight. There was no knock, no footsteps in the hallway. Just the sudden awareness of something pale resting against the wooden floorboards near the entrance. He frowned. The envelope was old-fashioned, yellowed with age, sealed with dark red wax that had cracked from winter cold. There was no address written on it, no stamp, only his name, Ethan Vale, written in thin black ink. Something about the handwriting unsettled him immediately. The letters looked nervous, almost trembling, as though whoever had written them had been afraid to finish. Outside, the snow thickened against the windows. Ethan opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a photograph. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than an abandoned church, standing in the middle of a snowy forest. The image was grainy and dark, clearly decades old, but the building itself dominated the frame with unnatural weight. Tall, Gothic, blackened by fire. Its bell tower rose into the white sky like the spine of something dead. Ethan felt a strange pressure behind his ribs. He turned the photograph over. On the back, written in the same trembling handwriting, were 7 words. The bells still remember your family. The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan stared at the sentence for a very long time while the radiator hissed softly behind him. His family. Not your father. Not your parents. Your family. Something deep in his memory stirred uneasily. A half-forgotten image surfaced in his mind, his father sitting beside a fireplace many years ago, drunk enough to speak about things he normally buried. Ethan had only been 12 or 13 at the time, but he still remembered fragments of that night. There are places his father had whispered, staring into the flames where God stopped listening a very long time ago. At the time, Ethan thought it was merely alcohol speaking. Now, he wasn't so sure. At the bottom corner of the photograph, nearly hidden beneath water stains, Ethan noticed faded words stamped into the paper. Black Hollow, 1974. He froze. Black Hollow. The name tugged at something ancient in his blood. He stood abruptly and crossed the apartment toward the old wooden cabinet where his father's belongings still sat untouched inside cardboard boxes. Dust rose into the air as he searched through them beneath the weak kitchen light. Old documents, military records, family photos, then finally a map, folded tightly beneath stacks of yellowing paper. Ethan spread it across the table. The moment he saw the circle drawn in black ink near the northern forests of Romania, his heartbeat slowed. Written beside the circle was one word, Black Hollow. His father had marked it personally. Beneath the map, almost hidden in the fold, was another sentence, written in shaky handwriting. Never go back. The wind outside groaned against the windows. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something stronger than grief. Curiosity. 3 days later, he drove north through Romania, beneath skies the color of ash. The roads became narrower, the deeper he traveled into the mountains. Villages grew smaller, quieter, older. Many of the homes looked abandoned entirely, their roofs collapsing beneath snow and time. By sunset, Ethan reached the last inhabited town before the forests swallowed the road completely. The town itself barely seemed real. A handful of stone houses, one church, one bar. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys into the frozen evening, while pale yellow lights flickered behind frosted windows. Ethan parked near the tavern and stepped inside. Warmth hit him first, followed immediately by silence. The conversation stopped. Every face turned toward him. Old men sat hunched beside candlelight with expressions that seemed carved from wood itself. None of them looked surprised to see him exactly, only uneasy. Ethan removed his gloves slowly. "I'm looking for Black Hollow," he said. The reaction was immediate. One man lowered his drink. Another crossed himself. Someone near the back muttered something under his breath in Romanian. The bartender, a heavy-set woman with gray hair tied beneath a scarf, stared at Ethan for several long seconds before speaking quietly. "You should not go there." Her English was rough but understandable. Ethan forced a small smile. "I'm only taking photographs." "No," she said softly. "You are looking for something else." The tavern fell silent again. Ethan felt irritation creeping beneath his skin. "I just need directions." Nobody answered. Then, finally, from the corner of the room, an old man lifted his eyes from his glass. His face looked ancient beyond age itself. When the bell rings, he whispered, "Do not answer it." Ethan frowned. What bell? But the old man had already looked away. Snow followed Ethan as he left the town. By midnight, the road vanished entirely beneath forest. The trees rose endlessly on both sides of the narrow path, like black walls stretching into darkness. Their branches twisted overhead beneath heavy snow, swallowing moonlight completely. Eventually, Ethan reached the edge of Black Hollow, or what remained of it. The village appeared slowly through the blizzard, like something emerging from underwater. Ruined homes leaned crookedly beneath snowdrifts. Broken fences disappeared into frozen earth. A rusted swing creaked softly somewhere in the darkness despite the absence of wind. But what disturbed Ethan most was the silence. No animals, no birds, no movement. The entire forest felt dead. He stepped carefully between abandoned buildings, camera hanging against his chest. His boots crunched loudly against untouched snow. Then he stopped. Footprints. Bare human footprints crossing the village road. Fresh. Ethan's pulse quickened. The prints disappeared toward the forest beyond the village, where a shape loomed faintly through the snowfall. The church. Even from a distance, it dominated everything around it. The structure was enormous, Gothic architecture blackened by old fire damage. Parts of the roof had collapsed inward decades ago, leaving jagged wounds open to the sky. Yet the bell tower still stood, tall and perfectly intact. Ethan approached slowly. Something about the church felt wrong in a way he could not explain logically. The closer he came, the heavier the air seemed to become. The front doors hung partially open. Inside, darkness swallowed everything. Ethan switched on his flashlight. Dust drifted through the beam like ash. The pews remained exactly where they had been left 50 years earlier, though many were splintered and covered in strange scratch marks. Religious paintings hung crooked along stone walls stained black from smoke. At the center of the church floor stood a massive hole, a circular opening descending into darkness beneath the building, and hanging down into that darkness, a thick bell rope. Ethan stared at it. The rope disappeared so far below the church floor that the flashlight could not reach the end. He swallowed slowly. Then he noticed something else. The rope was moving, not swinging violently, just gently swaying, as though something far below had touched it moments earlier. Ethan stepped backward instinctively. A deep unease spread through his chest. Suddenly, the wind outside howled violently against the ruined walls, causing snow to spiral through broken windows. The church groaned, and somewhere far below the earth, a bell rang once. The sound was impossibly deep, not loud, not sharp, but ancient. Ethan felt it vibrate through the stone beneath his feet and straight into his bones. The entire church seemed to breathe around him. Then silence returned, complete and unnatural. Ethan realized his hands were shaking. He backed away from the hole slowly before turning toward the exit. Outside, the blizzard had worsened. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing. He hurried toward the small hunting cabin he had passed near the village entrance, desperate now for warmth and walls and rational thoughts. By the time he reached the cabin, snow coated his shoulders entirely. He slammed the door shut behind him and leaned heavily against it, breathing hard. The cabin was tiny, cold, rotting, but safe. At least that was what Ethan told himself. He lit an old lantern resting near the fireplace and sat beside the frost-covered window while wind screamed outside. Minutes passed, then an hour. The storm deepened. Exhaustion slowly dragged against Ethan's mind. And just as his eyes began to close, he heard it again. The bell. Closer this time. Ethan opened his eyes instantly. The sound rolled through the forest like a heartbeat beneath the earth. One slow ring, then another, then silence. Ethan rose carefully and stepped toward the window. Outside, snow drifted endlessly through darkness. At first he saw nothing. Then far beyond the trees, a figure stood motionless in the storm. Tall, unnaturally tall. Its body was thin as bone, beneath a long black coat that moved without wind. And hanging from its neck, a rusted iron bell. Slowly, the figure lifted its head toward the cabin. And though snow concealed its face completely, Ethan understood with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at him. The figure did not move. Snow drifted across the forest in slow white waves, veiling the trees in ghostly curtains, but the thing standing beyond them remained perfectly still. Ethan could hear the weak creaking of the iron bell hanging from its neck as it swayed gently from side to side. Clink, clink. The sound was soft enough that it should not have reached the cabin, and yet Ethan heard it clearly. His pulse hammered against his throat. For several endless seconds, he simply stared through the frost-covered glass while every instinct in his body screamed at him to step away from the window. The figure was impossibly tall. Even through the storm, Ethan could tell its limbs were wrong. Somehow. Too long, too thin, bending at unnatural angles beneath the black coat hanging from its frame like funeral cloth. Then slowly, almost delicately, it tilted its head. The lantern beside Ethan flickered violently, and suddenly the figure was gone. Not walking away. Not disappearing behind trees. Gone. The forest stood empty once more. Ethan stumbled backward from the window, breathing hard. His mind clawed desperately for rational explanations. A trick of snow. Exhaustion. Grief. But deep down beneath logic and denial, another feeling had already begun growing inside him. Recognition. As though some ancient part of him had seen that thing before. The bell rang again somewhere beneath the earth. Low. Ancient. The cabin walls trembled softly around him. Ethan did not sleep that night. He remained sitting beside the lantern until dawn slowly bled into the forest, pale and colorless beneath the storm clouds. Every hour or so, the bell echoed again from somewhere beneath Black Hollow. Each ring, followed by long stretches of terrible silence. And during those silences, Ethan could swear he heard movement outside the cabin. Not footsteps. Something softer, like fabric, dragging slowly across snow. When morning finally arrived, the storm had weakened into a cold gray snowfall drifting lazily between the trees. Ethan stepped outside cautiously, camera hanging from his shoulder, exhaustion burning behind his eyes. The village looked even more lifeless beneath daylight. The snow reflected pale silver beneath the sky, while abandoned homes stood frozen in silence. Some of them had collapsed entirely. Others appeared untouched since the 1970s, their curtains still hanging behind shattered windows. Ethan's breath clouded before him as he scanned the tree line. No sign of the figure. No tracks. Nothing. But near the cabin door, half buried beneath snow, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Fresh, barefoot footprints. Dozens of them. They circled the cabin, completely. Ethan crouched slowly beside one of the prints. The shape was human, but unnaturally narrow, as though whoever had made them possessed elongated feet, almost skeletal in structure. And the prints ended abruptly, several feet from the trees, as though the person had simply vanished into air. A cold wind moved through the forest. The distant bell rang once more. Ethan stood immediately. This time, instead of fear, irritation pushed through him. He had spent months drowning inside grief, and silence months trapped inside memories of hospitals and funerals and empty apartments. Some stubborn part of him refused to run from another ghost. He turned toward the church. If answers existed anywhere in Black Hollow, they waited there. The walk back through the village felt different during daylight. Ethan noticed details he had missed the night before. Symbols carved into door frames. Strange circular markings burned into stone walls. Dozens of bells hanging from porches blackened by age. Small bells, iron bells, children's bells. Many had been deliberately nailed shut with rusted spikes. The deeper Ethan moved into the village, the heavier the silence became. Even the wind seemed quieter near the church. When he reached the entrance, the massive doors stood open exactly as before. The interior smelled of ash and wet stone. Ethan switched on his flashlight and stepped carefully through the nave. Dust floated through pale beams of light descending from the ruined ceiling overhead. Everything felt abandoned, and yet not empty. The sensation reminded Ethan of entering old cathedrals and forgotten European towns, places where prayer itself had soaked into stone for centuries. Only here, something else had soaked into it too. Something wrong. The hole in the church floor waited at the center like an open wound. The bell rope still descended into darkness below, still moving gently. Ethan approached slowly this time. Near the edge of the opening, he noticed metal stairs spiraling downward along the inner stone walls. Most were hidden beneath darkness, disappearing far below the church foundations. His flashlight barely reached 10 feet. The air rising from beneath carried a strange smell. Not decay, not mold. Something older, like wet earth sealed underground for centuries. Ethan hesitated, then descended. The staircase groaned softly beneath his boots while darkness swallowed him level by level. Above the church slowly disappeared, until only a faint square of gray light remained overhead. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. And somewhere below, the bell continued ringing. Slow, patient, alive. Eventually, the staircase ended inside a massive underground chamber carved directly into stone. Ethan froze upon reaching the bottom. The room was enormous. Ancient pillars stretched upward into darkness, while hundreds of candles melted across the floor in hardened rivers of wax. Rusted bells of every size hung from chains attached to the ceiling above. None of them moved. At the center of the chamber stood wooden benches arranged in rows facing a stone altar blackened by age. Behind the altar loomed a gigantic iron bell suspended from heavy chains. Its surface was covered in carvings. Human faces. Dozens of them. Screaming. Ethan felt nausea twist through his stomach. Then he noticed the tape recorder. It sat alone atop the altar, beside several old journals coated in dust. The machine looked decades old, its plastic yellowed with time, yet the small red indicator light still blinked softly. Ethan approached carefully. Beside the recorder lay a single photograph. His breath caught instantly. It showed a group of villagers standing outside the church in winter. Among them, a young boy staring directly into the camera. The boy had Ethan's eyes. Ethan picked the photo up with trembling fingers. On the back, someone had written, "The Grim Procession, December 1974. A sound echoed behind him. Clink. Ethan spun around violently. Nothing. Only darkness, stretching between pillars. But now, one of the small bells hanging overhead swayed gently. Clink. Clink. His chest tightened. Slowly, Ethan reached toward the recorder and pressed play. Static filled the chamber. Then a man's voice emerged weakly through distortion. "My name is Father Elias Grimm. If anyone finds this recording, you must not let the bell ring again." The tape crackled loudly. We believed it spoke to God. Ethan listened motionlessly while the priest's exhausted voice continued. But the thing beneath the village was never God. The underground chamber suddenly felt much colder. We heard it first during the winter famine. Bells beneath the earth. Voices calling from the forest, promising reunion with the dead. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. The villagers followed the sound into the tunnels beneath Black Hollow. Some returned changed. Others never returned at all. A long stretch of static followed. Then came whispering. Dozens of voices layered together beneath the recording. Ethan instinctively looked into the darkness surrounding the chamber. Father Grimm's voice returned trembling now. "It knows our grief. It wears our memories like skin. If you hear your loved ones calling, do not answer them." The tape recorder hissed violently. Then another voice emerged. Soft. Female. Ethan. Every muscle in his body locked instantly. It was his mother's voice. Not similar. Exact. The flashlight nearly slipped from his hand. His mother had died when he was 9 years old. Slowly, another bell somewhere deeper in the tunnels began ringing. Clink. Clink. Ethan. The voice echoed again from somewhere beyond the chamber. Warm. Gentle. Impossible. Tears burned suddenly behind Ethan's eyes before he could stop them. For years he had forgotten the exact sound of her voice. And yet here it was, perfectly preserved inside darkness. "Come downstairs, sweetheart." The words drifted softly through the tunnels beneath the church. Ethan stepped backward instinctively. The candles around the chamber flickered all at once. Then suddenly, every hanging bell above him moved together. Not violently, just slightly. Hundreds of tiny iron bells swaying in silence. Clink, clink, clink. The sound surrounded him from every direction like breathing. Ethan grabbed the journals from the altar and backed toward the staircase, rapidly refusing to look deeper into the tunnels opening beyond the chamber walls. Because somewhere down there, something was moving. He could hear it now beneath the bells. A slow, dragging sound against stone. The flashlight beam shook violently in Ethan's hand as he reached the staircase and began climbing upward. But halfway up, the voice called again, closer this time. Ethan. He stopped. Against all logic, against every instinct screaming at him to run, he turned his flashlight downward one final time. At first he saw only darkness below the staircase. Then two pale shapes emerged slowly from the shadows. Bare feet. Human feet. Standing motionless at the bottom of the stairs. The beam climbed higher. Long black fabric. Thin skeletal arms. And finally, a face, or rather the absence of one. Smooth pale skin stretched where eyes and mouth should have existed. And hanging from its neck, a rusted iron bell slowly swaying from side to side. Clink. The creature lifted one trembling hand toward Ethan, and from somewhere inside that faceless head, his mother's voice whispered softly, "You came back." Ethan could not move. The thing standing at the bottom of the staircase remained perfectly still beneath the trembling flashlight beam. Its pale, faceless head tilted slightly upward toward him. The rusted bell hanging from its neck swayed softly in the darkness. Clink. The sound echoed through the underground chamber like a heartbeat, and then it spoke again in his mother's voice. You came back. The gentleness of it was what terrified him most. Not rage, not malice. Love. The same warmth she used when tucking him into bed as a child during winter storms. The same softness that used to drift through the hallways of their old apartment when she sang quietly while cooking dinner. For one horrifying moment, Ethan nearly answered. Then the bells overhead began moving harder. Clink, clink, clink. Hundreds of iron bells swayed from the ceiling in growing rhythm while whispers emerged from deeper within the tunnels beyond the chamber walls. Dozens of voices. Men, women, children, all murmuring together beneath the earth. Ethan stumbled backward up the staircase. The creature below did not chase him. It simply watched. Or perhaps listened. Its blank face remained lifted toward him, while the bell around its neck continued swaying gently in darkness. By the time Ethan reached the church, above his lungs burned from panic and cold air. He slammed the cathedral doors behind him and collapsed against them, breathing violently, while snow spiraled through broken windows overhead. The church no longer felt abandoned. Now it felt occupied. The bell beneath the earth rang again. The sound vibrated through the floorboards beneath Ethan's boots, followed by a low groaning noise, somewhere deep below the church foundations. Like something enormous shifting in its sleep, Ethan grabbed the journals from inside his coat and ran. The storm had returned fully by the time he reached the village road. Snow lashed across Black Hollow in blinding waves, while darkness swallowed the forest beyond the ruined homes. The village looked wrong now. Not physically, emotionally, as if the entire place had awakened alongside the bells. Shapes moved behind frost-covered windows, slow silhouettes drifting through abandoned houses. Ethan forced himself not to look directly at them. He hurried back toward the cabin boots crunching violently through snow, while the distant bells echoed beneath the village like funeral hymns. Halfway there, he froze. Someone stood in the middle of the road ahead. A little boy, thin, barefoot, motionless beneath the snowfall. Ethan's stomach twisted instantly. The child wore an old gray winter coat coated in ash. Snow rested across his dark hair, while pale blue eyes stared directly toward Ethan through the storm. Eyes. Ethan recognized immediately. His father's eyes. The boy said nothing. Slowly, he raised one hand and pointed toward the forest beyond the village. Then the child turned and walked into the trees. Ethan remained frozen. Logic told him not to follow. Every instinct screamed that Black Hollow itself was trying to drag him deeper into whatever nightmare had consumed the village 50 years earlier. But another part of him, the grieving son still searching through ghosts and memory, could not let the vision go. He followed. The forest swallowed sound almost immediately. Snow muffled every footstep while towering black trees enclosed around Ethan like cathedral pillars. The little boy moved silently ahead between the trunks, never looking back, always remaining just far enough away to force Ethan onward. The bells continued ringing beneath the earth, sometimes distant, sometimes terrifyingly close beneath his feet. Eventually, the child stopped near a massive stone structure, half buried beneath snow. A mausoleum. Its iron gate hung partially open, revealing darkness, descending underground. The boy stood before it silently. Then slowly, he lifted his head toward Ethan, and his face changed. The skin stretched unnaturally. The eyes darkened into empty hollows. The mouth widened far beyond human anatomy. A rusted bell emerged slowly from inside his throat. Clink. Ethan staggered backward in horror. The creature smiled, then vanished instantly into darkness below the mausoleum. The bell beneath the village roared violently. This time, the sound shook the entire forest. Snow cascaded from branches overhead while distant cracking echoed through Black Hollow itself. Ethan heard buildings collapsing somewhere behind him as the underground groaning intensified. Something beneath the earth was waking up, and somehow, it knew him. Trembling violently, Ethan opened the journals stolen from the underground chamber and flipped through the brittle pages beneath his flashlight. Most were written by Father Elias Grimm, but several entries belonged to another name, Adrian Vale. Ethan froze. His grandfather. The handwriting trembled across the pages. We were wrong to dig beneath the church. The thing below the bell feeds on grief. It wears the dead because sorrow opens the door. Another entry followed several pages later. My son escaped tonight. If God is merciful, he will never remember this place. Ethan's throat tightened painfully. His father had been born here. Black Hollow was not simply a forgotten village connected to his family. It was his family. A final page had been torn almost entirely apart, except for one surviving sentence written in frantic ink. Someone must remain below to keep the bell asleep. The forest suddenly fell silent. Completely silent. No wind, no bells, nothing. Then slowly, a voice whispered behind Ethan. You should have stayed away. He turned violently. An old man stood several feet behind him beneath the snowfall. The same old man from the tavern. His face looked even older now beneath Moonlight Hollow, and exhausted beyond human age. You followed the bells, the man said quietly. Ethan stared at him. What is this place? The old man looked toward the village through the trees. Black Hollow died long ago, he whispered. But death is not always the end. The ground trembled faintly beneath them. The villagers believed grief could be undone. During the famine, during the sickness, they prayed for the dead to return. His pale eyes shifted toward Ethan, and something answered. Snow drifted silently between them. The thing beneath the church is older than the village itself, older than Christianity, older than these forests. His voice weakened slightly. It does not create life. It imitates it. Ethan felt cold dread spreading through his chest. It learns people through sorrow, the old man continued. The more grief you carry, the louder it can speak in the voices you miss. The bell rang again, closer than ever. The old man closed his eyes briefly. It wants you because your bloodline escaped. Your grandfather sealed the tunnels 50 years ago and left another man behind beneath the church. His expression darkened. The bellkeeper, the faceless creature. Ethan suddenly understood. Someone has always remained below, the old man whispered. One soul to keep the thing sleeping. And if nobody does, the old man looked toward the forest. For the first time, genuine fear entered his face. It climbs. A deafening bell roar exploded beneath Black Hollow. The ground split violently nearby, throwing Ethan backward into snow, while trees shook around them. Deep cracks spread across the frozen earth, like wounds opening beneath the forest. And from those cracks, hands emerged. Pale human hands clawing upward from darkness beneath the village. Ethan's pulse exploded. Figures began pulling themselves from the earth, all throughout the forest. Villagers. Or what had once been villagers. Their skin hung pale and stretched across skeletal bodies. Rusted bells dangled from their necks while empty eye sockets stared blindly into the snowstorm. Hundreds of them. The procession. The old man grabbed Ethan violently. "Go to the church." The dead villagers began turning toward them all at once. Every bell around their necks rang together. Clink, clink, clink. The sound became unbearable. Ethan ran. The old man disappeared behind him as the procession drifted through the forest between the trees like drowning bodies moving underwater. None of them walked normally. They glided. Their bells echoed through Black Hollow, while the entire village trembled around them. By the time Ethan reached the church, snow and ash filled the air together. Cracks spread across the cathedral walls, while the underground bell thundered beneath the earth like a monstrous heartbeat. The church doors stood open, waiting. Ethan descended the staircase once more. The underground chamber had changed completely. The candles burned violently, now illuminating hundreds of villagers kneeling silently before the massive iron bell at the center of the room. All faceless, all motionless. And standing beside the bell keeper. The creature slowly turned toward Ethan. Its blank face reflected candlelight, while the rusted bell hanging from its neck swayed softly. Then suddenly, it spoke in his father's voice. "Don't let it out." Ethan felt tears burning down his face before realizing he was crying. The bellkeeper raised one trembling hand toward the gigantic bell behind it, and Ethan understood. The keeper was not guarding the thing beneath Black Hollow. He was imprisoning it. Every ring kept it asleep. Every keeper sacrificed themselves to continue pulling the bell forever beneath the earth. The faceless villagers slowly lifted their heads toward Ethan together, waiting. The underground groaning intensified. Cracks spread across the chamber floor. Something massive moved beneath the stone, and then Ethan heard it. Not his mother, not his father. Something else. A voice, older than language itself, whispering from beneath the world. "Let me rise." The bellkeeper stepped aside, offering Ethan the rope. For one final moment, Ethan looked upward toward the distant light far above the staircase. Toward freedom. Toward life. Then he remembered the procession climbing from the earth. He remembered the village. The grief. The endless hunger waiting beneath Black Hollow. Slowly, Ethan took hold of the rope. The instant his hands touched it, agony flooded through his body like ice entering his veins. Memories crashed violently through his mind, every keeper before him, every winter, every death, every scream swallowed beneath the bell. The bellkeeper finally lowered its head. Its body began collapsing slowly into ash. And for the briefest moment before it disappeared completely, Ethan saw a human face beneath the smooth skin. His father's face. Then the bells rang. Months later, hikers traveling through the northern Romanian forests spoke quietly about strange sounds echoing beneath the snow after midnight. Most ignored them. Some turned back, but a few claimed they saw a ruined church standing deep within the trees where no village appeared on any map, and if those travelers listened carefully enough beneath the storm, they could hear a bell ringing, slowly beneath the earth. Clink, clink, clink. Sometimes, during heavy snowfall, witnesses even reported seeing a tall figure standing within the broken bell tower above the forest. A man dressed in black, pulling the rope endlessly in silence. And though snow always concealed his face, everyone who saw him agreed on one detail. The figure never stopped listening.